everything you think you know about the terror bird is wrong. For over a century, we have pictured them in a very specific way. We see them as the losers of prehistory. We imagine them as giant, awkward chickens running around the grassy plains of South America. Formidable, sure, but ultimately fragile. We were taught that they were an evolutionary experiment that failed. The story goes that for millions of years, they bullied the small, primitive mammals of the South. But the moment the real predators arrived, the wolves, the saber-toothed cats, the bears from North America, the birds were slaughtered. They were outmatched. They were obsolete. They were biologically inferior. That is the story written in every textbook. It is the story told in every documentary for the last 30 years. And it fits perfectly into our mammalian bias. Of course, the warm-blooded, smart, pack-hunting wolves won. Birds belong in the sky, not at the top of the food chain. But new research from 2024 and 2025 has revealed that this story is a lie. A massive fossil discovery in the La Venta Formation of Colombia has shattered our understanding of these creatures. It turns out we didn't just get their size wrong, we got their habitat wrong, we got their hunting style wrong, and most importantly we were wrong about why they died. They didn't lose a war to the mammals, they were actually holding the line against them. They weren't just fast runners on the plains, they were monsters of the deep jungle. And more terrifying than the idea of a 10-foot bird chasing you in an open field is the possibility that for millions of years, the most dangerous thing in the rainforest wasn't a cat or a snake. It was a beak. Join us on a journey back to the Miocene. We will uncover the truth about the Phorus racids and find out how science is just now realizing that these weren't overgrown chickens. They were the most efficient biological axes nature ever built. To understand why we got it so wrong, we have to look at where the legend began. The first pieces of these nightmares were found in the late 1800s in Patagonia, specifically the Santa Cruz Formation in Argentina. This is a cold, dry, windswept place. It looks like the Badlands. When paleontologists like the Florentino Ameghino first started pulling these bones out of the ground in 1887, they were baffled. They found skulls that looked like eagles, but they were the size of horses. They found claws that looked like velociraptors, but they belonged to creatures that lived 40 million years after the dinosaurs died. They named them Phorus racos. And almost immediately the grassland myth was born. Because the fossils were found in Patagonia, an area that was for much of its history open pampas and dry scrubland, scientists assumed this was the only place they lived. We built a picture of the terror bird as a savanna runner. We looked at modern creatures like the ostrich or the emu and said, okay, surely it's just a killer version of that. We calculated their speed. We looked at their long, thin legs and determined they could run at 45 miles per hour. We decided they were pursuit predators, chasing down small, terrified horses called Thetherium across endless fields of grass. And this assumption led to the second, more damaging myth, the fragile speedster. Because we thought they were built for pure speed, we assumed they were lightweight. If you trip an ostrich, it breaks a leg and dies. So, the logic went, terror birds must be fragile. They couldn't grapple. They couldn't fight heavy prey. They had to be hit-and-run attackers. This fed directly into the idea of their extinction. When the land bridge formed between North and South America, the Great American Biotic Interchange happened. North American predators, bears, cats, dogs, came south. The classic theory said that these heavy, muscular, grappling mammals basically broke the birds. A smilodon, saber-tooth, could wrestle a terror bird to the ground and snap its neck. The birds were glass cannons, high damage, no defense. Reviewing the fossil record in the early 2000s, it seemed case closed. The birds disappeared roughly around the time the cats arrived. Correlation equals causation. The mammals won, the birds lost. But in 2024, a team of researchers working in the Tatacoa Desert of Colombia found something that shouldn't exist. Colombia is thousands of miles north of Patagonia, and 12 million years ago it wasn't a desert. It was a lush, dense, tropical rainforest. It was part of the Proto-Amazon system. It was a place of shadows, thick vegetation, and limited visibility. It is the absolute last place you would expect to find a grassland runner. An ostrich in the jungle is a dead ostrich. Long legs get tangled in vines. High speeds are useless when you slam into a tree after 5 steps. You can't see prey more than 10 feet away. And yet, there was the bone. A massive tibiotarsus, the lower leg bone. But it wasn't the slender, flute-like bone of the Patagonian species. It was thick. It was dense. The texture analysis of the fossil, published in papers in paleontology, suggested this animal wasn't built for marathon running. It was built for power. When they scaled it up, the numbers were shocking. The Forus racid from Patagonia, the one we base all our movies on, weighed about 180 to 200 kilos. Big, scary, but manageable. The Columbian giant. This new fossil suggested a bird that weighed over 156 kilograms, 344 pounds, at a conservative estimate, but potentially much more depending on the muscle mass. It stood over 8.5 feet tall, but the weight is the key. A 350-pound bird is not a runner, it is a tank. This changes everything. If terror birds were thriving in the deep jungle, then our entire model of their behavior is wrong. You don't chase things in the jungle, you ambush them. This wasn't a cheetah of the bird world, this was a tiger. Imagine the scene. You're walking through the Miocene jungle. It is dark. The canopy blocks out the sun. You hear a low-frequency hum, not a roar, but a subsonic vibration in your chest. Birds are closely related to crocodiles and dinosaurs. They can make sounds we can't even hear. Suddenly the ferns explode. You don't see a slender bird running at you. You see a wall of feathers and muscle crashing through the vegetation. It doesn't peck at you. It slams into you with the force of a linebacker. This brings us to the second major reassessment. The beak. For decades, we looked at the skulls of terror birds, especially the massive kelencan, and we treated them like scissors. We thought they bit and pulled. But new biomechanical studies in late 2023 and 2024, analysing the stress distribution in the skull, suggest something far more brutal. The skull of a terror bird is extremely rigid vertically, but weak laterally. It can take massive impact from the front, but if you grab the beak and twist it sideways, it might break. This is why scientists thought they were weak. But the new interpretation is that they weren't biting like a wolf. They were striking like an axe. The neck muscles of these birds were immensely powerful, more similar to an excavator's hydraulics than a bird's neck. They used a vertical strike strategy. The tip of the beak is curved into a sharp hook. The Columbian giant didn't run you down and nip at your heels. It waited in the ferns. When it attacked, it drove that hooked beak downward with the entire weight of its 350-pound body behind it. It was a skull-crushing strike. One hit to the spine and it severed the spinal cord. One hit to the skull and it pierced the brain. This is the hunting style of a creature that doesn't need to run. It doesn't need to be faster than you. It just needs to be invisible until it's too late. So, if they were these perfect jungle-adapted killing machines, heavily armoured and capable of one-shotting prey, why did we think they were weak? Because we were looking at the survivors. The smaller, faster ones in Patagonia were the outliers. The true kings lived in the tropics, where fossils rarely form. The acid in the jungle soil eats bones. We only found the Columbian giant because of a freak geological preservation event. It hints at an entire lost kingdom of giant jungle birds that we completely missed. This leads us to the most tragic part of the story. The war that never happened. The narrative that mammals killed the birds is falling apart. We now know that Forus racids and large mammalian predators like the Bryonids, marsupial carnivores, coexisted for millions of years. They split the ecosystem. But what about the wolves and cats from the north? New dating of fossils suggests that many of the large terror bird species were already in decline or extinct before the major wave of North American predators fully established themselves. They weren't murdered, they were evicted. The culprit, as it so often is on hostile Earth, was the climate. Around the time these birds vanished, the world was changing. The glorious hot jungles of the Miocene were drying up. The trap that killed the titanoboa also killed the terror bird, but in a different way. As the Andes Mountains rose, they blocked the rain. The lush, thick jungles of South America began to retreat. They were replaced by open, dry pampas. Now wait a minute, didn't we start this video by saying they were grassland runners? If the world turned into grassland, shouldn't they have been happy? This is where the new science ties it all together. Since we now know the biggest, baddest terror birds were actually jungle specialists, like the Columbian giant, the loss of the jungle was catastrophic for them. They lost their ambush cover. A 350-pound bird standing in an open field is not a stealth hunter. It's a target. It's conspicuous. It can't hide. The smaller, faster species in Patagonia tried to adapt. They got leaner. They got faster. They became the grassland runners we see in the textbooks. But they were a shadow of their former glory. They were the desperate survivors regarding a changing world. And then the mammals arrived. The wolves and saber-toothed cats didn't kill the prime terror birds. They walked into a graveyard. They finished off the starving stragglers. It wasn't a battle of titans. It was a cleanup crew taking over an empty house. But there is one final twist. A piece of evidence that suggests the birds didn't go down without a fight. In the same Colombian fossil site on that massive leg bone, there are marks. Bite marks. We forensic analysed them. They match the teeth of Purosaurus, a giant extinct caiman, one of the biggest crocodiles to ever live. This paints a terrifying picture of the Miocene ecosystem. It wasn't a peaceful garden. It was a war zone of titans. We have evidence of a localised battle where a 40-foot crocodile attacked a 350-pound bird. It reminds us that these birds were fighting for their lives against monsters far scarier than a wolf. They survived in a world of giant crocs, titanoboas and massive marsupials. They held their own for 60 million years. To call them weak because they eventually succumbed to climate change and competition is an insult to their legacy. So, where are they now? Every few years there are reports from the deep Amazon. Locals talk of a mapinguari, or large bipedal creatures. Cryptozoologists love to suggest that maybe, just maybe, a small population of terror birds survived in the deep, unexplored pockets of the rainforest. After all, we just found out they were jungle animals, right? And the Amazon is huge. Sadly, science says no. The sheer calorie requirements of a warm-blooded 300-pound predator are massive. They need a healthy population to avoid inbreeding. They make noise. They leave traces. If a population of giant axe birds was breeding in Brazil, we would know. We would see the drop in prey populations. We would find the feathers. But looking at a shoebill stork today, or a sirima, their closest living relative, you can see the family resemblance. You can see the cold, calculating stare. You can see the sudden bursts of violence. The terror birds are gone. But they weren't the failures we thought they were. They were an evolutionary masterpiece. They were the only time in Earth's history where the dinosaurs actually managed to reclaim the throne. For 60 million years, mammals, our ancestors, spent their lives looking over their shoulders, terrified of the shadow in the trees. We told ourselves stories that the birds were weak to make ourselves feel better, to feel like we were the inevitable rulers of the planet, but the fossil in Colombia tells the truth. We didn't win because we were better. We won because the jungle died. And if the jungles ever return to their ancient hothouse thickness, who knows what might evolve to fill that silence in the trees? I'm telling you, nature abhors a vacuum, and the niche of silent feathered axe murderer is currently empty. Let me know in the comments, who would win in a fight, a Colombian terror bird or a saber-toothed tiger? The answer might not be as obvious as you think. Subscribe to Hostile Earth. We have more bodies to uncover.